second breakout session of the Zionist Federation Educators Conference. I'm very happy to do some introductions to you this morning of what should be a fascinating and provocative and controversial and perhaps educative panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Professor Andrew Marcus from Monash University, who is the lead researcher in the Gen 17 study, and many of you will have heard of that. And on the panel together with him, from my left to right, we have Shula Lazar, who's the principal of Carmel School in Perth, Jeremy Stowe-Lindner from Melbourne's Bialik College, and John Hamey, who's the principal of Moriah College in Sydney. So without further ado, Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you. Andrew's going to moderate the panel today. So thank you.
Okay, well, good morning everybody. Wonderful to see so many of you here. And I'm really looking forward to a lively discussion. So maybe, like, we haven't actually rehearsed this, but
No.
do you just want to maybe make a little opening statement of what brought you here and what is of interest to you, Gen 17 survey or the current developments in Jewish education?
Right, how long are we talking for?
3 to 5 minutes?
3 to 5 minutes.
Is that right?
Yep, that's fine.
Perhaps when you talk, if you could stand, because it's hard.
Do you want me to start or someone else happy to start?
Please stand. Stand where you speak, because people are left.
All right, I'll start. So good morning everybody. It's nice to be back. It will also be nice to go back. Okay, so when I read the Gen 17 survey and I'm thinking about what do we need to learn, what the Jewish day school movement in Australia need to learn from the Gen 17 survey, the graph that interested me the most was the one on page 15, and I don't have a slide of it because I'm not that prepared. This graph talks about how important or unimportant are each of the following to your own sense of Jewish identity. And it lists a whole lot of things, and people would say whether this particular whatever it was important or unimportant to their Jewish identity. And the order in which this was presented worried me somewhat. The first few items are either an incredibly negative association with Jewish identity, or they are an association with Jewish identity that isn't particularly Jewish. So the first one is remembering the Holocaust. It is very important that we remember the Holocaust. It is very important that we teach the Holocaust. But that is not going to be enough. That hook is not going to be enough for our children and our grandchildren to remain Jewish. It is a negative association. Judaism needs to be something positive. It needs to be something meaningful. The next one was upholding strong moral and ethical behaviour. Yes, we should all be morally strong and we should all act ethically. But to say that it is something particularly Jewish is quite frankly offensive to everybody who is not Jewish. You can be very ethical and moral and not be Jewish. The third one was combating anti-Semitism. Again, a negative association. To only be Jewish because other people hate you, well, I don't really want to be a part of a people where everybody hates them anyway. Learning about Jewish history. It is very important to learn about Jewish history, but if all you have is the history and you are not talking about the present and the future, that is also not good. So the list goes on, and the bottom three, which is the three I want to focus on, I think need to be our focus if we are going to reverse the trend of assimilation and intermarriage. The bottom three are as follows. Prayer. For prayer, only 36% of people found that was, fairly important to them. Now, prayer is not something particularly Jewish, but Jewish prayer is particularly Jewish. And prayer is a way to join with the Jewish people, no matter who you are and where you are. If our children, and they are our children, not our students, if our children graduate from our Jewish day schools not knowing how to participate in Jewish prayer, that leaves them on the outer. If they're travelling somewhere in Europe and they think, you know what, I might just, connect somewhere, and they walk into a shul and they are not able to open the Siddur and know where it's all at, because they weren't, taught that a Siddur is actually an order and it's the same order in every single Siddur. If they're not able to answer to Kaddish or Kedusha, and they stand there feeling alienated from what should be their time and their family, they are not going to join in. So as difficult as Jewish prayer is, and I understand how difficult it is, I think that being literate in Jewish tefillah is important to feeling part of the Jewish people. The next one is observing halakha or Jewish law. The way I interpret this is doing things that are particularly Jewish. Not so much, Jewish food. Like some people say that, it's very important to have Jewish food, which it can be, but honestly, a lot of Jewish food is quite horrible. I'd much rather eat Chinese. And it's not going to keep people Jewish because they eat chicken soup. It is not going to work. You want to be Jewish, you need to do something that is Jewish. Whether that is lighting candles on Friday night before you have the family meal, because the family meal in itself, again, is not particularly Jewish. There are lots of cultures and lots of religions in the world that place, have primacy on family. So if all you're doing is having that family time and you are not infusing it with Jewish ritual, then there is every reason to ditch it. And the last one was studying Jewish religious texts. I don't think, my opinion is that in Jewish schools we do not do this enough. We heard this morning that we are the people of the book. We need to study the book, and we need to study the book in a way that is intellectually rigorous. Our children are going to graduate from school and they're going to study physics from this professor and engineering from that professor, and they are studying these general studies from people who are experts in the field. And my fear is that our children are graduating from our schools and their level of understanding is somewhat at apple dipped in honey, maybe a bit more, but they don't see Judaism as an intellectually engaging exercise. They don't understand that there are writers and thinkers who can put everybody else in their pocket with what they can give us. And if they are searching elsewhere for that intellectual rigour, for that deep meaning and that deep understanding, then that is very, very sad. So I think that what we need to do with this chart is flip it on its head. And if we have graduates who have Jewish prayer, Jewish observance, and Jewish texts at the top of their list, then we can make sure that they stay part of our people and make that intermarriage rate fall. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'd like to just have a look at the data, because I think the data in the survey is really, really interesting. And I think my first 3 points you'll probably agree with, and the last one, some people will start throwing the furniture. So let's see how we go. So the first one from the data was looking at attitudes to their Jewish identity based on age group. And you would expect that as people get older, they'd be most likely to attend, or more likely to attend a Friday night, or more likely to see being Jewish as a central element in my life. But the data actually shows the opposite of that. That the younger people, the more likely they are to see being Jewish as central, and the more likely they are to attend a Friday night. Now, the response to that is, well, of course they do, because people in Australia, young people in Australia live at home more than they do, say, in the United States and the UK once they finish school. But the data was 18 to 29. It wasn't kind of 18 to 23, 24.
They're at home till they're 29.
And well, many of them are at 29, agreed. But it is, the graph is pretty clear. that even the next group, the next group, the next group are still more affiliative in those respects than the oldest age groups. So that was really interesting. And then the graph goes completely the other way about most concerned about intermarriage. So the young are more likely to go to Friday night, they're more likely to see Judaism Central, and they're least bothered by intermarriage. Now that is really interesting, and that is something that is a bit of a wake-up call for us in schools, because if we see Jewish continuity as a fundamental outcome of our practices, then we're getting a bit of it right, and we're getting you might argue, the bit that really matters, the numbers on the doors, wrong. So that was kind of thought number one. Thought number two was that, and probably what you'd expect, is that preference for Jewish day schooling declines as you go religiously leftwards. And I know there's value judgments on that. But if you put that together with concerns about intermarriage, it says that the challenge on Jewish continuity for the less religious community is obviously the greatest. Now that's teaching grandma to suck eggs there, that's what we'd expect. But then you look at number three, which is the challenge for this access on affordability. And the stats were quite interesting, that the Haredi community doesn't seem that concerned that the question was, has the cost of school fees prevented you from sending one or more children to an Australian Jewish day school? And 5% of the Haredi community says yes. Now, one might argue that given the, you can throw some furniture at this point, that given the very high levels of government funding for the more Haredi schools, around $11,000 to $12,000 per year, plus the $5,000 to $8,000 they might get from families on healthcare cards, is very different to the under $3,000 that a school like Bialik College might get. So when you're only getting $3,000 government funding, and you're getting between $11,000 and $18,000 per child of government funding, your ability to give financial assistance is going to be very different. So the Haredi community are kind of fine because they're getting significant assistance, and you might argue that it's a no-brainer. We're going to send our children to a Jewish day school. So that's just what's going to happen. What was interesting to me in the data was the modern Orthodox and the progressive communities were on exactly the same statistics. That 25% of them say that the cost of school fees has prevented them from sending one or more children to Jewish day school, which says that if you're denominationally, and they were the next lowest after the Haredim of concern, so if you're denominationally affiliative, whether it's progressive or modern Orthodox, then it seems that you're less likely to be intimidated by the sacrifices required in order to send your children to Jewish day school. So you'll make those sacrifices. Or you could look at it the other way, that maybe they're more affluent. The progressive identifiers and the modern Orthodox identifiers are more affluent. Or we don't know that. It would be up to Andrew to kind of track those two things together. But what's clear is the no denomination or the non-practicing say that the school fees is preventing us from sending our children to Jewish day schools. Now, we as principals of Jewish day schools come from the perspective that everybody can send their child to Jewish day school. And when I did an article in the Jewish News a few years ago, I got a bit of hate mail because I said, everybody can send a child to Jewish day school. We will all reduce fees to the level that is affordable. But if you want to go abroad every year, or if you buy a new car every couple of years, or if you're choosing to have a second car, we get that. That's a lifestyle choice, no judgment. But the school will not give a fee reduction if those are the choices that you're choosing to make. And I often use my wife's family as an example. They sent their children to an excellent Jewish day school. This one, throughout their schooling, they went abroad once or twice in the childhood and never bought a new car because they prioritised sending their children to Mount Scopus through the child. My generation is coming to different conclusions. We're saying, look, you know what? We want to have a nice school. We want to send our kids overseas. Don't judge us for that. And we've got some good primary schools nearby, so we can choose differently. And the people that are making those choices to a greater extent are those who are less practicing. So the challenge for the less orthodox schools is probably greater. Now the answer for some is we'll send all your kids to a school that does all those things. Send them to a frum school. They're not going to go. They're just not. That it's clear that the more practicing you are, you daven 3 times a day, you keep Shabbat. you keep kashrut, you're less likely to enter. But they're not going to. And they're not going to send their children to an environment where that is in dominance. So given that, then the challenge for the non-Orthodox is a little bit greater. The final bit from the data is about Zionism. Now, we can take great heart in the Zionistic data. Do you consider yourself to be a Zionist? The 18 to 29-year-olds are by far, and by a fairly significant gap, the most Zionistic sections. Bit of a dip down to the next group, 30 to 39, but then from 40 down to the 80, 89-year-olds, they're more likely to consider themselves a Zionist. I personally feel that here in Australia, we're in a beautiful bubble, and we're about to face the significant issues that are facing the large diaspora communities in the UK and in the United States. That the reaction, the job of the young is to be rebellious. That's their job, is to push the vote out. And when we've seen the young, the people in their, the teens and in their 20s, going to Breaking the Silence events, attending New Israel Fund events, we see such a reaction, such a violent reaction from the establishment, including some who are significant in the organisation that is sponsoring this conference, that at the moment the young are putting up with it, saying, oh, we'll do our thing. But there will be a point in time when, as far as Zionistic expression is concerned, the centre-right default within the community is going to push the young away and say that if your Zionism as a mainstream is a Likud-type mainstream and it does not tolerate an alternative voice, then this Zionism is not for me. So we need to be wary as a community to ensure that our tent is broad. And it's okay to have people who disagree with us or the mainstream, but we don't need to yell at them, we don't need to judge them, we don't need to be abusive towards them, and we don't need to be judgmental towards them. Because what's happening in the States and the UK, and I'm happy to talk another time about the case studies that are going on there, is that where young Zionists who support the State of Israel, who love the State of Israel, who identify with the State of Israel, who believe in a Jewish homeland for Jews, when they are expressing their Zionism in a centrist or a leftist way, they are being yelled at and being disenfranchised. And I just think we've got some really healthy stats at the moment on Zionism, but we've got some kind of canaries in the coal mine in other communities that are probably a little bit more developed in this way than ours, and we need to ensure that our tent remains broad. They're my 4 points.
So John Hamey, and I think I need to preface that I am not Jewish, firstly, and so these comments come out of my leadership of a Jewish school for the past 7 years, and I guess really what I've observed. And I think the first thing that I would like to say is that when I look at this data, and I think that the Jewish community is incredibly lucky to have this kind of data and to have this kind of survey work done, my first observation is, as somebody who's not Jewish, but somebody who is committed to their own Christian tradition as well, that, I mean, if we had young people in our tradition, so I'm Catholic, if we had young people in our tradition that were as committed to their communities and as engaged with their communities as young Jewish people are, I think that we would be applauding. So I think the first thing is that, I mean, whilst we might look at some of the results and not be heartened by them, I think, from a more global perspective, I look at some of this and I think, we have an incredible level of engagement of young people, of young Jewish people with their community and with their identity. And I think that that's something worthy of celebrating. It's something that we should be very proud of, and I think it's something that the Jewish Day School movement should be very proud of, because they are, partly strong contributors to that, along with the youth movements as well. And it's interesting how that bears out in the survey. I think the comments I want to make, I guess I was asked to think about the survey results from, how they impact on the Jewish Day School. And so my comments come particularly from that place. And there are a couple of things I'd say. One is around the issue of affordability. And I think that Jewish Day Schools, and we are well aware of this, are becoming unaffordable for a larger sector of our community and a bigger segment of our parents. And whilst it is, we can say, well, yes, our parents can afford to send their child to a Jewish day school, I think that that comment probably applies to some of the fringe dwellers around the communities that we're serving. So those people who are not opting in, they haven't necessarily opted out, but they've made other decisions. So it could be lifestyle decisions and so forth. But I think beyond that, there's a broader segment of the community for whom private education is out of reach. And if you look at, I suppose, the broader Australian population, the same thing applies. Like most Australian families cannot afford to put their children into independent private schools, particularly at the fee level at which the Jewish Day School movement is. It looks different in Catholic schools because they're primarily systemic schools, and they're a conglomerate of schools, and there's economies of scales that take place in that regard, and they also have a very long history. So I think one of the challenges for Jewish day schools is that we operate out of an independent school model, and I'm fully supportive of an independent school model, but it's also a very expensive model by which we operate. And I think that, and this is maybe a bit controversial and not really, and my various principal colleagues won't agree with this comment, I'm sure, but I think that somehow the community needs to look at how we can create economies of scales that serve all of the independent schools in order to reduce costs. And I don't think I think there's all sorts of politics involved in that, but I think it's something that if we're really serious about trying to reduce costs, we need to look at how we can do that. And I know that in Sydney that's a conversation that's starting to emerge, and it doesn't get a lot of airtime, but it's certainly something that's there. I think the other thing that I observed in looking at the survey, and I sort of picked up the graph that Shula picked up as well, but I looked at it a little bit differently in terms of Jewish identity, and I guess what did trouble me was that, I think sitting further down, or what was lowest rated in terms of being important, or very important or fairly important to people in terms of their Jewish identity, was belief in God, prayer, observing halakha, and studying Jewish religious texts. So I found that concerning, given that that's primarily, I suppose, the basis and the root of Judaism is found in those things. But I also found that in conflict with some of the upper statements as well. So, for example, upholding strong moral and ethical behaviour. I think that is part of Jewish identity, and whether you be Jewish or whether you be Christian or Muslim, I think that's integral, because the expression of that is found in the tradition itself. So it looks different in each tradition. So I found it interesting that people held that as being really important to their Jewish identity, yet they didn't hold as important studying Jewish religious texts, which is where I guess you would fundamentally find, your underpinning philosophies and principles that give you, I suppose, that ethical and moral code. So for me, the challenge that sits there is, how do you create a strong Jewish identity in young people that guides their, I suppose, their moral decisions and their ethical behaviour when they leave school, if you don't have, really strong, I suppose, or they don't have a really strong underpinning or understanding of the religious texts in which some of those things are found. So I find that troubling, and I just wonder, as a Jewish day school, how do we address that? What do we do about that? And I guess if I look at it from my perspective, if I look at the amount of time that we give to Jewish studies in our school, do we really give enough time for our students to really explore and understand and develop the skills to study, Jewish texts? And, I won't share my answer because there's people here that I work with. And they'll hold me to it. And then I think the other thing was that I had here was, learning about Jewish history. So people rated that as being important, and I think also remembering the Holocaust. And I think the two things go hand in hand. And I think that they are an important part of the Jewish identity. And I think in Australia, and I can only speak from the Sydney Jewish community and my experience of learning with that community and being part of that community, that those things are held very dearly and very important in that community. And I work in a school that is a memorial, war memorial school, and it comes out of, and it was founded by the Holocaust survivors, and so therefore it's been largely influenced and shaped by their story and by their history. So it is, I suppose, a very important part of the Jewish identity that we give to the children that are at our school. But I also find it interesting that people hold that, or that the respondents held that as being important, But then again, the study of religious, and Jewish texts is not as important, because I think, how do you do one really well without the other? So I think that there are conflicts that sit there for us as educators that we really need to tackle and that we need to challenge in our own schools. And then I guess my concluding comment was with regards to Israel and to Zionism. And I think I was heartened by what the survey told us about our particularly the 18 to 29-year-olds, I guess their feeling about Israel and how they feel about Israel and the concern that they have for what happens in Israel. And I think it's very good, and I think it's very strong. And I think that our Israel programs are a really important part of that. And in New South Wales, we've been very fortunate to have Y2I, which is a foundation which, fundamentally funds a good proportion of the cost of all of our young people in Year 10 going to Israel and participating in a 5 to 6 week program over there. And I think that I don't think we've really seen the dividends of that yet. I think we won't see that for a little while yet. But I think that it's certainly a key influencer and shaper in remaining connectedness with Israel. And I think that if our respondents identify, connectedness with Israel as an important part of their Jewish identity, it's something that we need to continue to nurture and nourish in our young people. So there's some of my comments.
Okay, I'm just going to ask a couple of the younger people here today if they've got a comment to make. And I'd like everybody to keep their comments relatively short, like under 1 minute, but anyone would like to make a comment?
How do you find young?
Young,
Below 50.
under the age of 35.
I have a comment for Jeremy. You spoke about rebellion. Sorry, I'm the head of Jewish Studies at Lee Government College. So you spoke about rebellion and how where Zionism is heading based in the UK and the US. So that sounds like to me it sounds like a very I guess a victim sort of approach as a school. Isn't a school's job to position that rebellion? Meaning there's two things you can rebel against. One is tradition, one is the world. Which means that rebellious attitude that students have, that can be, hey, we are the establishment, rebel against us, or hey, look at the world, rebel against them. Which means the world is giving a view on Zionism, which is very empowering for young people to stand up against. You're standing up against the age. You're standing up against the big kind of views, the New York Times. That's a huge rebellion, very empowering for a young person to feel like they are making a statement, rather than the small-minded rebel against a tradition that's, isn't that ultimately up to us as a school to position that rebellion so the kids know that we're rebelling against something much larger than my parents?
Sure, I agree with you. I think a minority of those who are expressing views that are more diverse than the community establishment has are in rebellion. I talked about those who are pushing the boat out. It's the job of the young to push the boat out. I think the problem is that those in positions of authority see pushing the boat out as rebellion. Did you hear that at the back? Yeah. That as soon as we say, you've got a different view to me, so therefore you're in rebellion. No, you're not. He's got a different view to me. It's equally valid. Because there's the mainstream, there's the rebels. They're not the rebels. He's got a different view. And we've got to see that tent as a broad tent. And we've also not got to badge people who have those different views as the acher. And we know from our tradition that the acher was coming from a very interesting position of strong identification, just not identification like me or like you. And we need to find ways to ensure that we don't badge them all as dangerous rebels. That we actually see that there is a diverse range of views in the community, and let's find ways of including them. My concern over it all is that we're badging them as anti-Zionist. It's not anti-Zionist. If you've got a view on a two-state solution, it's not anti-Zionist. If you've got a view that everything Israel does isn't right, it's not anti-Zionist. If you've got a view that you can criticize your friend, it's not anti-Zionist. It's not. It's coming from a position of love. And we've got to find ways of doing that, because at some point people are going to say, you know what, I'm out, I'm done. And that's the experience that's taking place in other diaspora communities. And if you go back a generation, I would assume that their Zionistic affiliation was similar to ours in those percentage points. So let's learn from that, and let's see if we can do things a little bit differently to them.
Can I just add to that, though, that I think the notion that everybody's opinion is valid, I fundamentally disagree with. Your opinions have to come from a place of knowledge. My opinion on whether somebody should or shouldn't have open heart surgery is not valid. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. So if our children want opinions, that's great. But they have to know things. They have to read. They have to be educated. So for them to have an opinion that they've plucked out of thin air, not so great. So as long as that opinion is coming from a place of knowledge and understanding that other people may have more knowledge than they do, then I think that's okay. And the other thing that I'm going to say, which is very not PC, but what the hell, when we're talking here about school affordability, and I lived in Melbourne for many years, having moved to Perth, Carmel school fees are about 50% of what they are in Melbourne. We've managed to make a school where our school fees are sitting at about 50% of what people are charged here, and maybe about 40% about what is in Sydney. And I welcome anybody to come to Perth and see what we do and how we do it, because the school, I think that we've got the school affordability question quite right. No, our staff actually earn more. Thank you. Our staff, our staff, I think are earning considerably more than what they get paid for in the States. What do I think the secret is? I'm really going to get shot. I think that in Carmel School, we do not suffer from price increasing competition, and that every time we make it, and I'm sure everybody, I'm just saying that what we do, I'm sure everybody else does this too, so no judgment there. Every time a decision is made about spending money, it's not made in the context of what percentage of the budget is this spend. It's how hard has it been for parents to get this money and bring it to the school, and that's how we make those decisions. And that I think we've very much stayed true to our mission of excellence in Jewish studies, excellence in general studies. There's not a lot of bells and whistles, but we do those two things really well.
Okay, any other? Thank you. Just introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Jason Shaltiel. I'm actually from New York, and I'm visiting here with Masa. Came to learn about the Australian Jewish community, and it's been a great time so far. Regarding some of the points you guys made, I have to say, as someone from States, we're facing a lot of the same concerns and issues as you guys. Regarding prayer and ritual observance, those are very, very big issues that come up in the States all the time. I was a product of the Jewish day school system. I didn't like Jewish day school, so I dropped out on my own volition. I grew up modern Orthodox, and I decided to go to public school instead. And I feel like for me the issue was the way that Judaism was framed in the school. It wasn't communicated in a way that was, let's say, like I could have added utility. Now that I'm older, I see the value in Shabbat dinner. I see the value in studying Tanakh and the Chumash, and even praying as well. I came here on Friday night and I went to a minyan with Zeus. It's a small little 20-some-odd-old people, and I'm from the States. I grew up, again, modern Orthodox, and I was able to fit in with this crowd and just pray with them. And imagine that, coming from across the world and being able to fit in with a group. I want to know a few things. For one, what's being done in the schools that you think work to strengthen those rituals among the students? How are you putting that into a perspective that's, maybe practical, right? How are the students getting to see the value in it? And then I'm also curious to know, how is it an issue with enrollment? You talked about prices. Is the issue of sending children to Jewish school, or is it an issue of how it's being taught there? How Judaism is being taught there.
Are you here for another Friday night?
Yes.
You should go to Scopus's Friday night minyan.
Okay.
That is actually fantastic, and you'll see it's done really well.
And go to Kalena and see that too.
Both on Friday nights?
Yeah, but you'll see where people are going.
Trying to
Okay,
get
so
into
let's
places
have,
that
do you want to-
I didn't really quite understand.
so
the
how do you,
question.
how does a child, feel that they belong? What do you, is it that it makes sense to you?
It
to
makes
be that-
sense to them. How are they seeing that there is value to this sort of upbringing, right? The Jewish upbringing.
But I
But could we
Sorry.
just have?
Yeah, sorry.
Look, I mean, look, it's not my lived experience, so to some extent it's hard to respond, but there are a couple of things I do want to say, which I think have been influential in our school. And I mean, some of my wonderful ex-students are here, some of the alumni of our college are here, and they can probably comment on this better, but I think that there are a few things that have happened for us in the last few years. I think that we have a much larger number of our alumni now that are engaged in the school, post-school, that are coming to lead Tefillah. So we would have 30, 40, 50 young people coming into our school every morning that are leading Tefillah from our alumni base. And I think that that's an extraordinary thing, and I think it maintains connection for those young people in the 18 to 29 age group. And I think the other thing that it does is it helps our younger people to understand the relevance or to see relevance in what they're doing, because they see people that they respect and to some extent revere, committed to this in their own life. The other thing we do is we have a lot of our alumni are now local MUDs, and I know that MUD Scopus do this as well, and probably others, but who are also MUDs at our Counterpoint seminars, and that in itself maintains a very strong connection with our school community, and they in themselves find, I suppose in that they find their own sense of belonging, their own sense of community by participating in those kinds of experiences. But the other thing, and one of my colleagues here recommended a podcast to me last night, and I can't remember, who was it with, Liz?
Andrew West on the Religion and Ethics.
Yeah, Religion and Ethics reports. It was Andrew West. And anyway, they were talking about the religious marketplace as an economic marketplace, that it's moving towards an economic marketplace. And it's a really interesting podcast. You should go and read it. It doesn't talk about Judaism at all, but what I found interesting was that they were saying there that, that spirituality in young people is not dying, but they are looking for it in other places. And I think that this is the challenge for Judaism. So, like, where do you create that place of connection for young people that means something to them? And so he was speaking about the fact that that it's moved online, and so a lot of young people are finding themselves and finding a spirituality in a place that makes sense for them, or a place where they belong online, and that then leads to other expressions of that. And I think that as I was listening to that, I was thinking, well, as a Jewish school, how are we doing that? Like, how are we really looking to find other marketplaces for Judaism, so places that make sense for young people and for young Jews, where they go and they feel safe and they feel that they can give an expression to who they are as Jewish people. And anyway, it's just a question that was raised, but it's something that I think we certainly need to explore.
Jeremy.
Thank you. It's really difficult to compare US schools to Australian schools. The United States is so particular. I've had the privilege of going to quite a few schools in the States in a few different times. And look, Dan Straight, our Director of Jewish Life, and I have a similar view to this, that we think there's a market in the US for pluralistic schools that really prioritize academic excellence, along with an incredibly strong informal Jewish education program that isn't trying to teach kids Gemara. That there is a feeling, I think, in many American schools, that in order to be a proper Jewish school, kids need to be able to interrogate Talmud. Well, and there is a view in some schools here as well. That doesn't tune in with a lot of the parent body. And we can all stand on our pedestals of what Jewish education should be, but if that isn't what the community wants, then we've got empty schools. So there is a bit of that. I would say just a couple of things. So coming from a very different perspective than the other two schools, the school that I had the privilege of being the key holder for is a non-denominational school. And we have gone through quite a change over the last 5 years. So 5 years ago, just when I arrived, we did an audit, which we called our hearts, head and hands. And hearts, what we can feel, heads, what we know, hands, what we can do. And we found that the graduates of our school were pretty strong in the heart, their values were pretty good, and their knowledge was okay. And their hands, their skill set was atrocious. They'd walk into a shul, they wouldn't know what to do. They'd pick up a siddur, didn't know which way to hold it. They go into a Friday night, they feel like an alien. So we've gone through quite a change in our school. And the nuance has been that we're not trying to from up the kids, we're trying to skill up the kids. Because if I walk into a Friday night when I'm 19 years old and I don't know what's going on, then the school I've spent 15 years at that talks about informed choice can talk about informed choice all they like, but I haven't got a choice because I feel like a muppet. And therefore my only choice is not to engage and to walk out feeling embarrassed. So the graduates of our primary school, for example, now, unlike their parents who attended the school, know Birkat Hamazon, they know how to navigate a Siddur, they know Shema, they know Modeh Ani, they know the rituals all around a Friday night service. And the community can say what it's like about our school, that was and therefore is now, but that is not true. The school has gone through a change in skilling up kids to make choices about whether or not they are part of the community. But we don't do daily tefillah. I've yet to find a school around the world that does daily tefillah well. We teach tefillah in context, in curriculum. And when we do tefillot, we give kids options of tefillot. So when we do Birkat Hamazon and we do the Avot, we say, look, some communities at this point also talk about the Imot. And you can choose at that point. Let's pause, let's turn that into a learning experience. When we go on Year 9 Zionist seminar and we do Shabbat, what are we going to do about a Mechitza? Do we have one? Do we not? Let's talk about it. Let's look at it as an educational opportunity rather than as a religious dilemma. One year we had a tri-chitza, boys, girls and mixed. That's engaging. That's giving kids choices. And that's empowering them with their own Judaism rather than defaulting to a Shulchan Aruch that tells us what to do and this is what we need to do. Because if we see, and I guess the key is, and we're still very early on in our journey, but we need to see us, I think a flaw that we've got around the world is that we see our Jewish schools as religious institutions. They're not. They're not a Bet Din, they're not a Bet Knesset, they're not a religious institution, they're an educational institution. And if we start seeing it all through an educational lens, then everything else starts to fit into place a little differently.
Okay, Sean, did you want to say anything?
No, I'll...
No, good. All right, Miriam and then Rabbi Kennard. Miriam?
I think we have the same question. My name is Miriam Arms. I worked on the survey with Andrew. I'm just wondering if we can take the conversation back to the actual question for which the panel was put together, and that is the future of the Jewish day schools. And
Yep.
any or all of you, right? Perhaps Andrew, you want to say something about what came out of the survey with regard to what's happened, or
I don't need to, but Rabbi Kennard, on your point?
Thank you. Could I just say before I go on to the future of Jewish day schools, we've heard some fascinating topics addressed, and I want to thank the panel very much for their contributions. I think each one of them could be another discussion, and maybe we could arrange it over today and tomorrow, because there's been many topics which we should be discussing, and now is our opportunity. But the name on the tin, if you like, for this session was the future of Jewish day schools. And that itself is a big topic, but if I want to zero in on the one critical issue, which is affordability. And it's tremendously frustrating that whenever two Jews get together, they talk about this topic and nothing happens. And when two Jewish machers get together, they don't talk about this topic, which is why nothing happens. So I'll try and be brief, but I do have a couple of things to say. And the first thing is, it baffles me why the JCCV, why the Board of Deputies, why ECAJ is not putting this at the top of their agenda every single meeting. Because this is the most important thing which will determine the future of the Jewish community. Whether our families can send their kids or choose to send their kids to Jewish day schools. It's not the only factor, but it is the biggest. And it is tremendously sad that basically there's a little bit of talk and there's no action. And I'd like to say two things which I think must happen if we as a community are serious about this problem and the importance of this problem. Number one is money. Lots and lots of money. And there is money in the community, we know there is, and yet that money is not being diverted into subsidizing school fees. Now whether it needs to be universal or means tested, to me that's a detail. But there needs to be that understanding that we need to put in money, I think 9 figures worth, 9 digits worth, into a fund to make a real difference for parents in our community. And we're not addressing that. And there is a prospect, and it's been going on for years, of a discussion which may raise $10 million, which to my mind would be worse than nothing, because it would raise expectations and actually achieve no results. And the second thing is what John alluded to, which is economies of scale. And the reality, more so in Melbourne than in Sydney, and infinitely more so in Melbourne than in Perth, is that there are lots of schools. And it's very nice, but there are lots of schools, and each school is distinct, and each school has an individual ethos, and no school exactly replicates what other schools are doing.
But we have to ask ourselves seriously whether that is a luxury we can afford. And in my opinion, if we are serious about school affordability, we have to talk about rationalisation of resources, which is another word for merging schools. And in my opinion, if we do not talk about merging schools, we are not serious about school affordability. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to get just a quick response to those issues. All right.
I have a couple of things to say. I've been to two Jewish day schools in my life, so this is David and now I'm at the movement. So I know a lot about this topic, I'd say. I think that there's like a few things that have been said on this panel that are kind of a little bit misguided in my opinion. I think that to say that going to Shabbat dinner and things like that isn't enough is a serious misunderstanding of what Judaism is. Judaism isn't just a religion anymore. It is a culture, it is a people, it is a language. It's so much more than just religious practice. And so I don't think there's something that's much more Jewish than sitting around at a dinner table with your family and talking about your week on Friday night. I also think that the problem with what is happening in the Jewish schools isn't about what we're teaching, it's how we're teaching it. What has happened is that we're teaching Judaism with this serious idea of like keva, routine. But what we need to be teaching it is with kavanah, with intention and with love and with like compassion. And that's what Judaism is meant to be. And there's no kavanah anymore. It's all about like, oh, do they know this? Do they know that? That shouldn't be it. It's how do they feel about it? How are they connecting to it? That's what the youth movements are doing, and that's how we're succeeding. I'm sure that if you took a survey of just the youth movements, that entire graph on page 15 would be full. I can nearly guarantee, right? But it's not the case because we're not teaching our kids in a formal setting in a way that actually connects to them.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll take two more questions and then a response. Yes.
First of all, I'm just like to address this to Jeremy. I do believe that tefillah is linchpin. I do believe that what Shula said is correct. We at Moriah College have addressed that issue, and again we invite anybody to come and have a look at tefillah years K1 and 2 and see what we do in terms of making it very much more meaningful for children, and we do prioritise it. So I think things are happening. And things are moving. We are including mindfulness, we are including meaningfulness and kavanah in tefillah. And again, as John alluded to, we haven't seen the results of that yet, but those results I believe will come through because there's an incredibly positive, beautiful feeling within tefillah. We also have lots of madrikim coming into the school. That's the first thing. The second thing was a question, and it's kind of mostly directed to you, Professor. I think we also, when we look at what happened in the United States in the 1980s, and they looked at the whole issue of assimilation and intermarriage, and they spent a lot of time and money on looking at the communities, and the JCCs right around America looked at all of the communities, and they came up with this, I'm going to put it very simplistically, let's water down Judaism and make it viable and make it attractive to the American Jewish community. The result of that was it failed. It didn't work. Intermarriage is extremely high in the United States. Disengagement with Judaism is extremely high in the United States. It didn't work. So again, it kind of goes back a little bit to what Jeremy was talking about before. I think we need to take a strong stand with Judaism, and I think I'm totally agreeing with what Shula said. Flip it over, go back to teaching text the way it's meant to be taught. There is a way of making it meaningful.
Okay, thanks. We're going to stop you there. Okay. And just one final comment there, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Samo from
Please.
Samo from Informal Education, the Emmanuel School. I have seen...
You've got half a minute, so go.
I've seen with my friends and also in the community that people are coming out of Jewish day schools and they are feeling totally Jewed out. They're feeling suffocated. They've never met a non-Jew before. They want nothing to do with the community. The rebellion is towards the community instead of encompassing and being a part of it and feeling great. So I met a parent recently who said, I want my kid to be Jewish, I'm not going to send them to a Jewish day school. I guess getting back to the main point is like, what is the future of Jewish day schools and how are they going to build our community into a stronger community?
All right, so we'll have to wrap up now, but before I ask the panel participants to give a final comment, you know, the value of a survey such as Gen 17 is that it can ground your understanding. Because if we had time to ask another 15 questions, we get 15 beautiful perspectives of what should be done. What the survey tells you is, I think in a more practical sense, what is possible? What are the structures that are shaping the way that a community is working? So that's where I encourage you to sort of look at that and look at the, you know, what's achievable within a narrow band and what's a long stretch, to be able to distinguish between likelihood of success, high risk. Okay, so if we just go around now, final comments.
Final comments to speak to Rabbi Kennard's point about affordability. I agree, the schools need to look at ways where there are going to be economies of scale, and sometimes I think that we assume there are going to be more economies of scale than there actually will be. In terms of VCE, which is an absolute money sucker, you could, you know, definitely look at ways to, for the Jewish schools in Melbourne to find a way to make VCE affordable and also eliminate the need of having tutors in every subject from the other school, which is kind of what happens. And then with regards to the future of Jewish day schools, I agree 100% with you, and thank you for agreeing with me. I like people who agree with me. If the Jewish schools do not increase Jewish knowledge, Jewish understanding and Jewish connectivity, then there's no point of us being here. If the graduates of our schools have the same level of knowledge and understanding as someone who has gone to a public school and to UJEB and to the programs in their shul, then that is really chaval. So I think that instead of watering down Judaism and making it, more, I don't know, I was going to say happy clappy, but it needs to be real learning. It needs to be academically rigorous. And I think we also need to look at the time we give to Jewish studies, because to think that our students can engage in Jewish studies in a meaningful way in the time that we give them is disingenuous.
Okay, so three very quick points in response to the last few comments. So my colleague from Moriah, it's no coincidence, by the way, that the two schools that have really looked at tefillah, which is Moriah and Bialik, have actually come to the same siddur. That we've both gone for the Koren Siddur, which is put together by my ex-chavruta Daniel Rose.
And Carmel.
But it's interesting that we are really thinking about this and struggling with this, and we should struggle, and it will be a continual struggle. With regards to Rabbi Kennard, as ever, we are in 90% agreement. I agree with...
10% that we always talk
I
about.
know, isn't it? So let's talk about that bit then, which is that on school affordability, it is about that big picture thinking and communal funds and communal fundraising and realignment of donors and school mergers. It is that, but it is also about the hard slog of year-on-year budgeting. And when I go back 6 years to when I came, not naming any schools, but if you look at our school and a large school in Melbourne, the fees were very similar. The fees were very similar and almost identical. Now, on average, the fees at Bialik College are around $1,800 to $2,000 cheaper per year level per child. So what's happened, now that's a lot of money. Now we know that $1,800 difference doesn't make a difference to it. It's the first 20,000 that knocks you out of Jewish schooling, it's not that last bit. But through really tough budgeting, not big announcements about small scholarships and things like that, but actually tough budgeting and focused on that, you can actually have a slow, incremental, but each year not really noticed impact on school fees that impacts significantly on your bottom line, but also makes a difference to our parents' on a day-by-day basis, and by us doing that year on year on year, we have been able to achieve a gap by not just focusing on what everybody else is raising, but actually on looking at what we're able to do. On the last point, my colleague from Emmanuel, I'm sorry, I'm much more optimistic. I engage with alumni, I engage with youth movements, I look at the data from this survey, and the graduates of our schools are, in the main, very optimistic about Israel, very optimistic about Zionism and their Israel and their Zionism, very optimistic and engaged with their Jewish identity. And yes, there are some on the fringes, there are. But actually I see something very different. And I also see complementing that is the work of the youth movements supporting children in Jewish schools and not in Jewish schools to develop their identity in parallel. And what I was upset by when I saw the article in the Jewish News about the JCA and the JCA funds, it mentioned Jewish charities, Jewish cares, Jewish schools, and didn't mention Jewish youth movements. And I contacted, I sent a note to those authors, to the main figures involved in that to say, what about the youth movements?
I've got 1 minute, so I'm used to that. But I think that the thing I wanted to say something about the youth movements. I think that it's a symbiotic relationship, as Jeremy said, between the Jewish day schools and the youth movements, and I don't think that one exists without the other. And I think that that relationship needs to continue to be fostered and it needs to be strong, because I think because that's where a lot of our kids find their expression post-school in some of those youth movements. The other thing I do want to say, and I think that we forget this sometimes, is that one thing that we need to celebrate is that sitting in this room are some of the highest performing schools in Australia. And I think that we overlook that, and I think that sometimes we forget that, and I think that that needs to be celebrated. And I think not just highest performing in terms of academic success, but highest performing in terms of how they deal with, I suppose, some of the most vulnerable students that sit in our community as well. And I think we really should applaud that, and I think that that is not celebrated enough, and I don't think as a community we celebrate that enough. And I think, really my last point is probably, in terms of affordability, and I would, really speak to James's comments that, really, unless the larger community really addresses this issue of affordability and funding towards schools, we are going to move into a crisis where it is simply not going to be affordable for parents to send their students to a Jewish day school. And it's a communal problem, and it's a problem that the community has to take up. And it can't be a problem that is a problem for the schools alone, because the school alone is not going to be able to address the issue. It doesn't matter how much you take off recurrent spending, how much you take off your capital budget, those things are not going to fix the problem of affordability for Jewish education. And if you look to other, I suppose, systems and other faith-based systems, there is a lot of funding from their communities that are directed into those schools to keep them going and to keep them supported, which is more than just government funding and more than just the fee income that they receive. But look, my bottom line is I think we have to celebrate what we have as well, because it is amazing. It is amazing.